Hello, and welcome to this interview with Arco Berkenbosch, who is a representative of Smurfit Kappa, a big packaging producer. And we'll be talking about sustainable packaging, which is obviously a problem on many people's minds. Hello, Arco. Very, very nice to have you. So
Thank
let
you.
me start with a bit of a provocation. As I said, packaging is something that preoccupies a lot of policymakers, a lot of consumers. But how big a problem is it really, especially in the West, where waste management systems are near leak-proof, and therefore, the sort of packaging that does occasionally leak out, you will see some things flying around on the street or on the beach. But in the grand scheme of things, that's visible but not that dangerous. So why do we really need to worry about packaging?
Well, of course, um, part of what you're saying is correct. That packaging is very visible. It's very visible. It's something that creates a lot of emotion by overpacking, etc. So the attention on packaging is always very much there. Is it still a problem in the West? Well, a couple of things. First of all, and that will be under the Green Deal in the future forbidden by Europe, but a lot of the waste and the packaging we collect is exported to Asia or to Africa to be recycled over there. And of course, I'm not talking rocket science to say that we can question how effective and how clean and how without leakage the recycling is at that place. On the other hand, assuming that all the packaging is collected, and like you say, we don't see a lot of litter, which is today, unfortunately, still the case. But suppose everything is collected. Today, the actual recycling rate in Europe is close to 30%. That means that 70%, and all the numbers show that the majority of the packaging that is collected, especially the plastic packaging, is incinerated. And with all the challenges on climate change ahead of us, we should, I think, seriously ask ourselves if getting oil out of the ground, making a plastic bag or a plastic box out of that, and then burn it from energy, that is the way to solve our climate crisis. I mean, basically, if we go on incinerating packaging like we do today, the contribution of packaging to the climate change will increase by 30% in the coming 3-4 years. So I think we have to split, when you talk about packaging as a problem, you have to split it in two ways. The collection, where we are a bit ahead in Europe compared to other parts in the world. But then also, after the collection, what do you do with the waste? And that, unfortunately, in the majority of the cases, and in certain materials, especially plastic, much higher than in other materials like glass or metal or paper, we don't know how to handle the waste, and that is a problem.
So that's a perfectly respectable answer, and I wonder, what are the obstacles? Why is it such a big problem? Is it a question of technology, or just not being able to differentiate between the different types of packaging waste? Not just between paper, plastic, but also within plastics. Obviously, they're very different, and they often cannot be recycled together. Is it a question of economic incentives? What are the big obstacles to making to reducing the global environmental footprint of packaging? Be it the sort of environmental one that we talked about that ends up in the ocean, and the carbon footprint.
Like with all big problems, and I think earlier Bill Gates has talked about, we need bold action. So we need some dramatic innovations. And like with all big problems, it doesn't have a simple answer. There are many obstacles. I think one of the major obstacles is that we still see it as a problem. We're still focusing very much on fighting the old, and we don't look at as it's an opportunity. I mean, in that way, I think the packaging industry and the packaging users, the producers, can learn a lot from the automobile industry, where guys like Elon Musk and Tesla have changed the game with electric cars, and I saw the crisis we have with fuel consumption as an opportunity to differentiate. Um, Having said that, I think well, there are two big obstacles. The number one economical obstacle is that everything we do, putting it very black and white, is still priced and costs in a linear way. So when we look at the cost of the product delivered to the consumer, we look at the raw materials, we look at the manufacturing, we look at the logistics, and at the end, we look at selling it to the consumer. In the total costing system, the waste management and the damage the product is doing also financially to the environment is not taken into account. So the current economics is very much driving a linear system, a linear economic system and not a circular system. I think the other big obstacle is that the big challenge is a system challenge, a more logistic challenge. I mean, in principle, every material is recyclable. It's a matter of time, it's a matter of technology, but coming from R&D, I believe we can solve that. The problem is to make the system in a practical and economical way work. I mean, if you look at the most recycled materials at the moment in packaging, which is carton board, that reaches recycling rate and collection rates of close to 90%, but still 10% is leaking. So if you look now at all the scientific studies, the estimation is that at the foreseeable future, the maximum recycling rate practically for plastic packaging can be 70%. So it is a system challenge, maybe more than a technology challenge. I mean, making the recycling system work, making the collection work. And the second thing is that I think we are still hesitant to really go for the breakthrough innovations, to really accept that some of the functionalities we have to put aside. Like Elon Musk accepted that at this moment, the electric car has a different range than the gasoline car. So we have to challenge the status quo also more to harvest opportunities.
So actually, you mentioned the obstacles, and I wonder to what extent sort of solving the system problem is a question of changing consumer behavior and consumer awareness, and to what extent is it a question of introducing, for instance, better sorting technology? In other words, to what extent does the system, do you think, need to rely ultimately on a conscious consumer who would be able to, for instance, sort rubbish properly? And to what extent is there hope for a technological solution which would mean that consumers don't have to go through the trouble in the sort of medium term?
Where I'm really always getting a bit emotional, a bit annoyed is when industry starts to blame the consumer. You see a lot when you go to social media, when you go to conferences, you see a lot like the problem of packaging is not the material itself, it's how the consumer handles it. For all these years, we as packaging producers, our customers as users of packaging, have educated and generate value by changing the mindset of consumers, by selling cucumbers with plastic wrap around it, by making smaller portions. So I think we as an industry also now have the responsibility, let's call it that way, to educate and to help consumers to sort and collect in a better way. The easiest one and the most feasible one is to collect and to sort it at the source, so really by the consumer. I mean, I know there's a lot of technological developments with all kind of tags putting in plastic so we can sort it later on. I think that's still a couple of years ahead of us, and I think we have to ask ourselves if we have that time. So the best short-term solution is to first move to reduce as much as possible the problematic packaging. So still, we also have to be honest. There's a lot of packaging that is in the wrong material or not necessary. And secondly, then if the packaging can be recyclable, making the recycling for a consumer as easy as possible.
So the interesting thing is, you would have thought that I mean, obviously, in some cases, packaging helps protect the product. Be it a fresh fruit or vegetable, or a high value product which needs to be placed into some sort of a box in order to ensure that it isn't damaged, and so on and so forth. So in many cases, that's true. In some cases, there probably is sort of excessive packaging that you could perform the same function with less, and you would have thought that producers, they would love the opportunity to use less packaging because, every layer of packaging is an additional marginal cost. So why isn't that happening? And one possible, and I don't have the answer to that, it's an empirical question, but one possible answer is that, consumers sort of, they say one thing, but actually deep down, they prefer things which are wrapped solid, for whatever reason. So do you have a sense of why producers still use excess packaging, even though it does mean an additional cost for them, and in a world when consumers, especially in Europe, are increasingly aware of the problems?
Yeah, well, that's the famous value action gap. That's, I mean, if you read all the interviews, if you read all the questionnaires, 64 or 65% of consumers tell us that they're more likely to buy products that are in less packaging or more sustainable packaging. Um, the reality is that we have all been educated for many years in all the correct convenience packaging is delivering to us, from easy opening of milk cartons to smaller portions to making it clean or making it more beautiful when you give it as a present. So I think there's a lot of optimization going on. I still think that um, we have to become stronger in showing the differentiating value proposition of more sustainable packaging to consumers. And I think consumers need to be educated in that. Consumers need to be convinced in that. We as industry and for Smurfit Kappa, our customers need to go to the market, to the end consumers with the same passion how they introduced all this packaging in the past with unsustainable materials, with the same passion, the same energy, the same marketing efforts to try to sell and differentiate the more sustainable packaging solutions. So yes, a lot of downgrading and a lot of optimization, I would call it, is happening. Still, yeah, and the online sales channel is, I think, one of the best examples for that. If you look at the amount of empty air that is shipped in there, still a lot of possibilities are there to, as I would call it, reduce the packaging problem.
And what does this mean for packaging companies like you? I mean, sort of, you find yourself in the awkward position of trying to convince consumers to buy less of your stuff in a way. Um, and in order to make up the difference, you need to offer sort of a premium product. So higher quality, more sustainable, but that is probably going to be costlier. In order to maintain the sort of revenues, you would need to increase margins if you have lower sales, which is ultimately, the sort of, at least the rhetoric of a lot of the packaging companies: use less of our product. Um, so it seems like that's a perfectly sensible approach, if indeed that's the one that packaging producers are embracing. But it can work for things for products which have a high value, where the cost of packaging makes up a tiny fraction of the final cost to consumers. Um, it's a bit of a more of a problem for the sort of low value things, like, I don't know, a tin of yogurt or something. Um, so how do you think about it as a business challenge and a business opportunity?
Well, first of all, I think we are lucky, since I work in the paper industry, we are lucky to work with a natural material, which is renewable, biodegradable, which is recycled in practice. So, of course, we have our challenges in the production and manufacturing, but as a principle, as a fundament, the material we work with is a natural material, so with very low sustainability impact. The second thing is that I believe that as a supplier to brand owners, we should always focus on generating value for them with the most optimal packaging solution. And if this most optimal packaging solution means we use a little bit less grammage of paper, or we have to change the way we develop the packaging, so be it. Since, I mean, at the end, the core role I think we as packaging producers have, and especially we feel that the Smurfit Kappa, is to generate value for our customers, the people that use that packaging material. So I think also on the cost element, of course, there need to be to help push us into this value action gap, and to help solving that, we need sometimes some legislation or some push from governments. But I also believe that in general, for a lot of packaging, the amount of packaging is relatively small, the cost compared to the total product. And we also have to look at reimagining the way we ship and we sell products. Let me give an example. We brought to the market very successful 6-liter bag-in-box for water. So instead of shipping 6 individual bottles, we now have one big box with a very lightweight plastic bag in there that's easy to separate. And that, of course, saves a lot of logistic costs and a lot of packaging. And at the end, if we can show the value of that, and our customer in Spain, in this case, was able to show the value to consumers of moving away from 6 bottles to this one big solution, I think there's a lot of opportunities for industries and for companies like Smurfit Kappa. So the whole area of sustainable packaging, we really see that as a huge opportunity to bring innovations in natural materials to the market.
So actually, this brings me to the question that I had next, and which was about sort of the appetite for this sort of innovation from your customers, from your customers, so the brands. So you mentioned this one that there was. Is most of the new innovation sort of coming at the behest of the brands? Are they sort of approaching you and saying, we would like to change something. We have a sense that consumers want something else. This is something that we would like to offer to consumers as a differentiator? Or is it coming from you saying, we have this new solution, we think it would be great for your brand? What's the sort of dynamic there?
Yeah, you can predict the answer on that one, of course. It's both ways. I have to say that the days that we had to convince users of packaging, retailers, consumers, brand owners, that sustainability was an important topic to take into account, those days are over. I mean, sustainability is extremely high on the agenda. But coming back to the beginning of the talk we had, we need big disruptive steps. I mean, it is big steps to move away from 6 bottles to one bag-in-box. It means big investments, but it means also that customers need to be daring to take the risk. So it is very high on the agenda. The demand is enormous. The amount of projects is increasing every day, but it also requires a different way of thinking, a different way of marketing, a different way of organizing the logistics. So the reality is, it took us years to end up with this challenge, that it's not easy overnight to solve it. So the demand is there, the questions are there, but there are many hurdles, technical, marketing, cost, sales-wise, to take to bring the solution on the market in practice.
Well, unfortunately, we've basically run out of time. So I suppose that, you could say that we are ending on a positive note in the sense that what has changed is a clear consumer demand, both customer demand and sort of end consumer demand for the sort of thing that we've been talking about, which is great news. And hopefully, when we reconvene in the coming years, as I hope we shall with you, we will hear some more progress reports. Thank you so much, Arco. This has been a pleasure.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you.